Hey everyone, welcome to Listen, Love, Connect. I'm Savannah Paula Fox, your host, and today's guest is Chelsi Potts. We'll be discussing about late diagnosis and autism. Let's head over to her to find out more.
Listen, Love, Connect is brought to you by Exceptional Heroes.
Hello, Chelsi. Welcome to Listen, Love, Connect. I'm so excited for you to be here. We are discussing about the late diagnosis and autism, which you know so much about. But before we get into it, can you tell us about yourself?
Sure. So thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here. Very excited. As I told you when we were doing our pre-meeting, this is my first time doing one of these interviews, so I'm very excited. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself and start off. I started off kind of just, I would say, as someone that was late diagnosed. I got diagnosed with ADHD in 2020, and then I was diagnosed with autism in 2022. So literally a few short months ago. Prior to that, though, I was working in higher education. For me, I always needed something that had a very pre-designed path. And education has always been that for me, which is for a lot of people as well. But I said, you know what, I'm going to stay in this and make this a career. And so I stayed. And then I got my educational doctorate from the University of Kansas. And I was like, okay, what do I do? I do next. At that point, I really was excited and I took a job as a dean of students. And I thought that that was my dream job. And I got burnt out um, immediately. I was overseeing, I want to say, about 8 departments or so. I had close to 50 people. I had direct reports, but around 50 people in the division. So the meetings, the different things that now that I know that I have autism completely drained me and now it makes sense. But at that time, I didn't understand what was happening. I was just really disappointed in myself. I was really down on myself because I was like, why can I not perform in the way that I think I should? And I use that word perform on purpose because that was kind of what it was. It was like, I can do this. Let me show people I'm productive. Let me show people that I'm worth and have value and I deserve to be in this seat. And so once I was diagnosed, I went through this piece where I said, I have to get my life in a place where I can actually be emotionally regulated and feel like I can do my best work. And I don't know if this environment is the right environment for me to do that. And
Yeah.
that was dream crushing for me because I had gone all these years, I put in all this investment in getting through school, and then decided, I don't know if this is actually for me, but then what does that mean, especially after you have built a life around something and then you find out that that really isn't the thing that's going to pan out the way that you thought, or maybe you can't handle it, right? There's a lot of self-blame that goes into that, and we'll talk about that too. But what ended up happening was that I said, I'm going to move. I'm going to take a job somewhere else, and I'm going to look for a lower level role. So in higher ed, you have your coordinators, your directors, and your deans. And I said, okay, I'm going to go down to a director role and
Mhm.
see how I can do better in that situation. So I moved myself from Kansas City, Missouri to Cincinnati, Ohio, and started in just rural Ohio. I work in a school in rural Ohio, which is very different for me for a whole lot of reasons, cultural reasons, and other whole lot of other stuff. It's been a journey, but started doing that, and then that's when I started talking about the unmasking process and what that actually meant. Because for me, I was reframing my life, but I was still very much dealing with imposter syndrome and feelings of guilt from leaving my past life and thinking that now that I'm here and I'm autistic, I'm like, this made sense, but I was still very brokenhearted. And I just felt like my entire life had been built around something that was not really aligned with who I was as a person. And so I just felt like I went into a complete identity crisis. And so
Mm.
that's when I started scrolling on TikTok and getting more information about, like, well, what is this? And you have those aha moments. You see a video and you say, oh my gosh, I know about that. Or, like that sounds like me. And so I started to do some research, went and talked with my psychiatrist at the time and said, hey, this is what I think this is going on. And she was like, I can see that. And I was like, oh, what does that mean? But either way, it was like, I don't
Give
know if
me
you've
some more
always,
information.
yeah, I'm like, what do you think about that? So from there, I was like, let me talk about this in a way that can resonate with other people. And that's where that entire kind of unmasking process started. And I put that out into the world. And then people began to comment and they were like, well, what about this? And what about if I'm a rebel? And what if I want to do this? And I was like, Okay. Different strokes for different folks. And then I expanded it to what it is today. And then that's when I really started getting deep into like, I really want to help other people that are late diagnosed, have
Mhm.
autism, and are going through these same things, even if you have ADHD too, because I work with people like that as well. But just thinking like, how can we make this normalized, right? At least in our own experiences, so
Mhm.
that we don't feel alone and we can know that there's a next step and you don't have to just spin in this space of I don't know what to do and let that be the rest of your life. So that's a little bit about me.
I love it. What a journey too. But and I know we're going to get into this more, but you mentioned about masking, and it's funny you say that because I only learned about the term masking just like from you and from a few other people from TikTok because I was going to school to be a child psychologist, but I always called it a filter. So I feel like it's the same kind
Yeah.
of thing. Me and Chelsi were talking beforehand, and I told her how I felt like I might be autistic, but it's funny how I used the word filter before I learned about the term masking.
Mm-hmm.
And I resonate a lot with your videos about that. So, was it you, or let me just ask you, what was your inspiration to go on this study for a diagnosis in autism?
So I think for me, the biggest thing was how can I help people? I mean, that was really the biggest motivation was like, how can I help people? It would make me sad when I would like literally when I say sad, I mean like I would think about random strangers throughout the day and I'm like they said this and they're spinning and it doesn't have to be that way.
Mm-hmm.
You can move your way out of this. And so I was like, how can I provide this something that can just land and make sense? Um how I was going to approach it was actually not the best way because how I was going to approach it was just me just making videos and not really pointing to myself because I didn't want that to invalidate people.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that was actually probably the most validating thing I could do was just put out my own experience into the world. But initially I was like, let me just focus on other people. Let me decouple it from myself and let me just talk about the symptoms. Let me tell people to stop scrolling or let me tell people to find themselves or work through trauma or whatever the case may be. But what actually landed was me in just my bullet journal and
I
people
love it.
saying, yeah, I'm like,
It helps me.
yeah, I'm like, that worked. And when I thought about it, I was like, you know what? This is what it's really about because that's how I've always thought. Like I
Mm-hmm.
think in a bullet journal, that's why I have one because I'm like, this doesn't make sense in my head. And I think that's a common problem that people with autism will have is that you'll have in ADHD too, you have all these jumbled thoughts. And to actually get it to a place where you have to teach yourself how to do something, you usually have to completely deconstruct it and then reconstruct it back together to teach yourself or teach other people. And that's really what happened. And so once I saw how much it took off, because initially I started with the theory and stopped it. I said, this is because of capitalism. And I was like, all right, bye. And the people were like, but what next? And like, what do we do? And then that's what really inspired me to dig like a lot deeper and really like look at other people's experiences, do some real deep research and kind of get back into my research bag from when I was in grad school and say like, okay, how can I make this, something that's going to land? So the motivation behind all of it was really just me wanting to help people. And even now, I've still had like conflicts when people were like, oh, I want to pay to do this or pay to do that, because that's never been what it's been about for me. I'm like, if I could leave something that helps one person, two people, three people, I am okay with that. But we're just such a population, like the autistic community, the neurodivergent community is such a place where we get forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
We're consistently invalidated. And so I'm like, if I can bring some validation to that, I want to do it. I think one other thing I'll point out too is that with me getting my doctorate, I knew that I was like, I want to get my doctorate because that's going to add validation to the experiences. Because some people, I mean, in the neurotypical world of hierarchies, right? You get the
Yeah.
doctorate and people listen. And I knew that. And so that was a big motivation too, was like, if as long as I can get this doctorate, then I can actually do the real work that I want to do that has nothing to do with my actual doctorate. But this allows me to do and have a platform where people will say, okay, I can trust that. And not only just the neurodivergent population, but the population of neurotypicals that will
Mm-hmm.
completely dismiss what you're
Yeah.
saying if you don't have letters behind your name.
Right. And it's sad that you had to do that, and it just couldn't be from your own experience, but it also helps. But again, sad. It's like pros
Yeah.
and cons, right, to everything.
Yeah, it is. Like it really is. And I mean, I say that all the time. I'm like, there's duality and everything, but that for me was just one of those things where I'm like, I gotta do it. I'm gonna get it, and it worked. But then you still get sad that you're like, it worked.
Yeah.
Like the world really is how I thought it
Reality.
was. This worked. Okay. But yeah, but I think it's all for the good now, so that works out.
Yeah. Um, why why do you think people are getting diagnosed later in life than the typical age of 18 or 24 months?
Well, I think there's a lot of reasons for that.
Yeah.
I will say particularly with women, and I can't put this with men, but I'll talk about it with women, is that in the DSM, so that diagnostic book, they just added women and girls, I want to say in the 2022 version of
Uh-huh.
that DSM. So it's been in the last couple of years. So prior to that, autism was seen as a man's disease. It was what boys get, girls don't
Mhm.
get it. And then we were more associated with Asperger's, and because we were high functioning
Mhm.
autistic people, which that's a whole other another episode probably of
Oh yeah.
how gender plays a role in all of this.
Yep.
But I think now we're at a place where one, you have TikTok,
Mhm.
where people are getting a wealth of information, which
Yeah.
is why even with this ban, I get so sad because I'm like, this is where you can get a wealth of information and people are beginning to identify like, oh, that makes sense, right? I've
Mhm.
always felt odd, but there were just not people, I want to say 20 years ago, looking at girls as this is something that they can have.
Yeah.
So I think that plays a role. I think also because of the rigidity of how you have to diagnose autism, or how people used to have to diagnose autism. If you weren't diagnosed by two, then
Mhm.
there's no possible way you can have it, right? If you're a girl, there's no possible way you can have it. So I think we're just now getting to the spot where people can get diagnosed, but it's still difficult because one, you have to find a provider. So that's the
Yeah.
first thing. A provider that can actually diagnose autism, because everyone cannot diagnose autism. And I was making a video about that 5 minutes ago. Everyone cannot diagnose autism. So you have to find somebody that can do that. And then once you do, is it accessible? It's usually not free, especially for
Mhm.
adults. It can be very expensive. Like I was talking to one, I'm gonna call him my good friend now. We met once, but he's my good friend now. So that's like an autistic thing to do. And I'm like, you're my good friend now. But he was telling me, I mean, he's in DC, the DC East Coast area, $4,200, right? Like to get a diagnostic exam. And him, just like my daughter's doctor told me this week, they
Mhm.
both said the same thing. You don't really need the diagnosis. If you want it for validation, you can get it. But this is not, it's not going to give you any more access to drugs. It's not going to give you any more access to anything else. Most of the what do you call those things? Accommodations are usually for children, right?
Mhm.
So it's just one of those where, like I tell people, I'm like, we're just now catching up. Like I think the world is just now catching up to the fact that women can have it and that it can look different, that you can have empathy, right? Like I
Mhm.
was just telling you in the last question, I really care about people and I wanted to do this just for people. But if I was to go somewhere 2 months or probably a year ago and say, yeah, I really care about people, and then they would say, well, you can't be autistic because you have empathy. And so now we're just getting to the point where you can have empathy, it can look different, you can still have sensory issues and all of these different things, but we're just now getting there. And I think it's still going to take time. I hope in 10 years it won't be so uncommon to see girls getting diagnosed and
Mhm.
then having people that are adults be diagnosed and those sort of things. But I think it's just time and just now catching up. And unfortunately, we were kind of guided by a place that was based around cisgender white men. And now we're growing past that, which is great, but I think that's why it hasn't been diagnosed, and I think why I got overlooked and everything else. So yeah.
For I feel like people don't realize we're all different. I mean, people probably do realize it, but when it comes to conditions, they feel like it's like a cookie cutter when it's
Mm-hmm.
not. We're all different people. We have all different symptoms to the same diagnosis. Am I wrong?
Yes, no, you are correct. You
Yeah.
are very, very correct.
So, You mentioned masking earlier, and I do want to bring that up just for the people who don't know what that is.
Yeah.
Could you tell us more about masking?
Yes. So masking is any time that you are suppressing your disability, and you can do this subconsciously or you can do it consciously. So, for example, I'll use an example from my own life, for example. I am someone who it takes me a long time to process. So emotional processing is an issue, right? So what will happen is that something will happen to me, an event can happen to me, somebody can physically hit me in the face. I won't process the emotions that go with that until a day later. When I'm in spaces, what I will do is I will just react as if I've seen other people react. So that could be, oh my God, why would you do that? I feel so this, I feel so that. I probably have not actually felt those feelings yet. But I'm telling you, or I'm expressing that I'm showing those feelings. And that is basically me masking. Another daily example can be me walking into a social situation. I'm not good with small talk. So when people say, hey, how are you doing? And I'm like, hey, how are you? Da, 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 da. One, my voice is inflecting to a way that I don't even talk that high. I actually have a pretty deep voice. But it's like it's high, I'm waving, I'm doing all these things. And then what happens how you know you're masking, right? Because some people will say, everybody does that, right?
Yeah.
The difference is that now I've done that and I'm drained. I am anxious, I'm sweating, I'm not really being myself. I don't really know what to say. I can't continue that conversation probably past 5 minutes once I give you my how's the weather, how are the kids, how's life. I'm pretty much like, okay, well, bye. But that's like me masking. I think another example of this, and one that is probably the most detrimental to people, is their work capacity. So when we're in situations and you're working like an 8-hour day, a lot of people that are neurodivergent need more frequent breaks to just get themselves regulated, but we'll continue to push through the day so we can appear like everyone else, so we can appear like we are not slacking off or that we're not capable in our jobs. And that's really what masking is. It can happen at home. Some people mask and they're by themselves. There have been I've been masking just by myself. Like I'll suppress my stems. That's also masking. I move a lot. I have hyperactive ADHD and I have autism, so I dance. My dance is a stem, and I will just dance. I'll move, I'll jump, I'll sing, I'll do all those things. If I don't do those things, then I will feel physically uncomfortable. But if I suppress those things and I'm masking because I don't want people to think I'm weird, because I can't just be, doing all this in the meeting. I mean, I guess I could, but I don't. I mask it, right?
Yeah.
Because socially acceptable. So I don't do that, but that dysregulates me, right? And my body will have to pay for that, right? In a small way or a big way. And then over time, if you have masked every interaction, if you mask your stems, if you have worked yourself just to be productive or to make yourself seem capable, right? If you allow people to touch you in ways that make you uncomfortable because they're socially acceptable, like some people, I don't actually like shaking hands. Some people don't like hugging. Hugging's probably the worst thing that you can probably do to me. But if you touch my hand, that is, even now I'm like, I don't like
Yeah.
I can't deal with it. I cannot deal with it. But I think when we're in those spaces, like if you do that and you're doing that for your whole life, especially if you're doing it and you didn't even know you were doing it, you're just doing what you were taught was socially acceptable. That takes a toll on you. And that's where I get into why you have to unmask. And then what does that look like and how do you unmask safely? Because you will get to the point of burnout if you don't do that. And it can take years or months to recover from burnout, and you don't want to get to that point, but so many of us do because we're unconsciously masking who we are all the time.
Wow. There is a lot to masking that I watch your videos and it's been helpful, but hearing it here too, it even helps more because there's so many layers. If that makes sense.
Yes, it's so many layers.
If someone is questioning that if they might be autistic, what signs might there be? I know we just said that there's a whole spectrum of different ones for different people, but could you give like an idea?
Yeah, sure. You know what? I'll give one that is probably more common, and then one that I think is common that people don't talk about
Okay.
in this. So I think one is sensory, like so emotional regulation, and then being dysregulated by senses, your senses being overloaded. So what that means, you'll hear people say, I can hear the electricity in the walls, or I can hear the fan going. Like right now, there's a fan in my background. You probably can't hear it, but I hear the motor in the fan and
Mm.
it is bothering me. And like that can get me to the point where I hear that. I hear my kids down the hall. I hear the blender downstairs. And these are all normal household noises, but my senses are completely overloaded. On a
Mm.
day like today, it's not too big of a deal because I've been at home all day.
Mhm.
If I had been at work all day and I've been talking to people and I've been running meetings and I've been doing all these things, and then I come home and the fan is loud, that can take me to like a point where I'm like, I have to get under a weighted blanket.
Mm.
I think also too, like when your social battery completely goes down, and I don't mean in the sense of being an introvert. That's
Mhm.
not what I mean. But I
Yeah.
mean where you get to the point where there can be times where I'm literally like, okay, I just have to get myself together. I just have to get myself together. I just have to get myself together. That can be a sign that there is some emotional dysregulation issues, some sensory issues, and that you need to kind of work through that. Now, that doesn't mean it's always tied to autism, but that can
Mhm.
be something that it can be tied to. I think with the emotional regulation piece, the amount of processing time, I talked about that a little earlier, but like the amount of processing time that it can take, like not being able to process your emotions or feeling like you're in a shell in your body can also be a sign. And then being disconnected from your body can also be a sign. And what I mean by disconnected from your body is that you don't eat, not because you're not
Mm.
hungry, you just haven't thought about it. Because you're in your head all the time and you're processing. A lot of people that I've realized that have had autism, or we talked about it, they have very bad relationships with their physical bodies
Mm.
because of, I think one is masking, right? And then the amount of trauma that your body can take as you're doing that can make you
Yeah.
disassociate yourself. So now you don't know that you're hungry, you don't know that your head hurts, you don't know that you need to take a break because you have disconnected yourself from your body so much and lived in
Mhm.
your head. And I think that also plays into that emotional dysregulation piece. Something that people don't talk about is sexual issues. So this is something that I've seen, and it goes into those sensory issues, but a lot of people have problems in their relationship because of physical touch and kind of the negative relationship with your body and how that works. But you can literally get sensory overload from somebody. So personal example from my life is that my partner is a physical touch. Oh my gosh. He loves physical touch. He wants to touch. He wants to hug. He wants, and not even just in a sexual way, but just he likes to touch. I do not.
Mm.
It makes me jump. It makes me do different things. And then he could feel rejected by that. And so a lot of people will have problems with connecting with people. And
Mm.
especially if their love language is physical, or sometimes even if it's emotional in a way that you really can't connect or empathize with, like that's also a problem too. And not empathy in that you can't exercise empathy, but more so that if you don't have a situation to relate it to,
Yeah.
and then you're like trying to figure out like, okay, how can I put myself in your shoes and figure out what this is, and then that can come off as disingenuous to the other person and make it seem like you're not empathetic even though you want to be. It's just you're trying to having a hard time connecting. So I think those are some ways that it can play a role. I think there's of course some other things that go into it, and there's much deeper things, but I
Yeah.
always try to make sure that that like with that, like if you're thinking about it, like sometimes those things can be connected to trauma and you
Mhm.
maybe won't be autistic. But I think once you realize you have a whole plethora of those things, you have the sensory, you have the emotional dysregulation, you have, these social issues where a lot of people will talk about, I really feel like I never had friends, or that I only had friends because they pitied me because they thought I was weird. I didn't know how to connect. That was awkward. That can be
Mhm.
another sign, but I think you have to see them kind of in combination and over time and see how they impact you, because some things can look like some things that they're not. And
Yeah.
so that can be dangerous at times, but if the shoe fits and you have a lot of those things, and that can usually be a sign that you may be somewhere on that spectrum, even if it's not maybe what you thought, maybe not as deep as you thought, but you might still be on there.
That makes sense. And I just want to put a disclaimer, we are not diagnosing anybody on this thing. We're
Yes,
just giving
thank you.
education advice.
Yep.
um, what mental health issues and emotional transition issues have you seen in late stage autism diagnosis? I know it's a loaded question.
I think the biggest one is after you find out either through self-diagnosis that you have autism or you were officially diagnosed. That stage after, for me, that was about 6 months, and I still go through phases where I'm like, oh, I'm really autistic. That is hard, and I think that it's difficult because if you've never suspected that you had autism until the point that it smacks you in the face, then you probably have a lot of social constructs in your brain about what autism is, and that probably didn't look like you. So I think there's an identity crisis that can happen, and then you wonder, like, oh my gosh, like if I was to have never masked any of these things, how would I have acted? How would I have adapted? If I begin to tell people that I have autism, how are they going to think about me? Like, what will they think? Will they think that I'm still capable? Will they think that I'm still smart? How will all of this work? I dealt with it in the sense of I already had a doctorate. And so people would say, you don't have that, you're smart. And that's also a smack in the face because I'm like, I do have this, but I am still smart. You can be both. Most autistic people are very smart. Giftedness, autism, and ADHD are actually connected. And that's a whole nother discussion, but they're all connected. And so you get to this point where you just don't know what to do with yourself anymore. And especially if you begin to unmask, and here's the piece with unmasking that can be the dark side of unmasking, because there's duality and everything. But you begin to unmask, and then you start to realize that you'll have skill regression, right? And then you'll realize, oh, I can't do this like I used to do it. So, for example, my value was rooted in productivity. So I'm gonna continue to do the stuff. Anything you ask me to do, I'm gonna do it. Even if I don't know how to do it, I'm gonna learn how to do it because I can dig in, hyperfixate, figure it out, keep going. That is not good for me. So I've had to relearn how to be productive in a way that feels good to me, but also doesn't kill my body. And then thinking about the perception of what somebody else is going to think about me now that I'm not performing the way that I used to before I was aware that I was working myself into the ground. Those things are difficult, extremely difficult. And I think you get to the point where you're like, well, what do I do? Right? Because I have to work, right? I have to continue to provide for my family. Like, I still want to have a good, healthy life, but you can get lost sometimes in trying to figure out, like, how do I do this and still keep myself regulated and still be a productive human being? Or does productivity even matter? Like, you just have all these questions. And so I think, at that point, that's where I think it gets difficult. And that's where I feel like people have the most identity crisis. We can't even get to the point of going from unmasking to reframing until we get past that stage. And that's where people get really, really stuck. And if you think about it, like, let's say if you're post 30 or post 25, either way, even if you're 18 plus, right, you've still gone your entire life under this one set of guidelines. And now somebody's blowing your life up and telling you that, or even if you're blowing your own life up, if you self-diagnose, like, oh, shoot. And then you're like, wait a minute, I really probably can't do that in the way I thought I was going to do it, or go about this in the way. And that can be depressing. It could be scary. It can cause a lot of anxiety. And I think that is where some people make the decision to say, I'm just going to remask and continue my life the way that it was, just so they won't have to deal with that disruption. And it's going to come up at some point. Like, you'll still deal with the depression, you'll still deal with the anxiety. But I think some people would rather deal with the depression and anxiety of that than versus the depression and anxiety and then not knowing what to do with their entire lives if they do decide to unmask or, you know, move forward with that. So that's kind of what I think is probably the most difficult.
Do you think some people go through like I believe it's 7 stages of grief too?
Yes. So I said yes. So okay, so one of my best friends, her name is Kyra. She works with special needs children, and she does a lot of this work. And we were talking about the 7 stages of grief and how that can play a role. And so that's why I like emphatically said yes, because I was like, we were just talking about this. Because yes, I mean it really is that. And you know, you bump back and forth between the stages, just like in the 7 stages of grief. Like there was at one point where I was in denial. Like I was extremely excited. Like let's say when like with the ADHD diagnosis, I was like, this makes so much sense. Like I was in tears, but I was like, this makes sense. This is so validating. And then I'm like, I have days and I'm like, I don't think I have it. Like I don't think I have it. I still have days where
Yeah.
I'm like, mm, no, I don't have it. If I'm having a good day, for example, and everything gets done, I'm like, oh, see, I was just making excuses. Like, I don't have this, but I do. And then there's days where I'm accepting and I'm like, this is who I am. And then there's days where I don't want to talk about it. And I don't want people to know that I'm dealing with this or I'm struggling with this. So it depends, but it's like a consistent loop and it's scary. And so until you get to the point where you get that really good self-awareness and self-love, which can be hard, especially because you're relearning how to love yourself in a different way from a different lens. And a lot of us haven't connected with ourselves or really loved ourselves. And I think those are also issues that come into play. Even going back to your last question, just about what's the hardest part. It's just like if I've always struggled with knowing who I was and I've always felt weird, I've always felt out of place. And now you're telling me I have this. And now you're telling me I love myself. Come on, girl. I don't know how to do all that. You know, so it could be difficult, but that stages of grief, that is so real. And I was thinking about even doing a video on that when we talked about it, because I was like, oh, this connects perfectly. And I didn't think about that because you really are grieving, like that mask grief is real too. Grieving your mask. And I'll talk about that really quickly too, just because. So that's something too that I've struggled with is the grief of my mask, because I actually wrote a poem to my mask maybe like a couple of weeks ago, because I was like, my mask got me through all these phases. My mask got me the degree. My mask was the person that made sure that I can get the dean job at 31. People don't get dean jobs at 31. And I'm like, my mask helped me with that. And then I'm like, but she's gone now. And does that mean that everything else is gone? I don't know. It may look different. But I like her sometimes. And sometimes that mask kept me protected from a lot of things. And so I think that's hard, because there are some times where it's just like, this was truly who I was, and it still is a big piece of who I am. I just go about it differently. But to disconnect those two pieces it's hard. Yeah, it's hard. And I've talked to people too that have told me like, I like my mask, like I miss my mask. And I'm like, I get it. And I see that more in the productivity driven people, where that's kind of been rooted, everything's been rooted in productivity. Like I think those are the hardest people to break away from that mask, because it's just like, I'm on fire, I'm great. And then you're like, but you're dying when you get home. And that's the part people don't see. And that's the part you need to heal. And then you have to choose something outside of yourself. And then back to that self-love. Like, how do you choose you versus choosing everybody else and their perceptions of you?
Well, I want to say thank you for sharing that. Because I think it does help a lot of people to see other people who are going through something similar. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
We're not ending yet, but I think you are an amazing resource for people. What social medias, platforms, and if do you have a website, can you share with them so that they can connect with you if they need someone to talk to?
Yes. So my website will be launching this evening. So hopefully by the time this is posted, it'll be up. So I'm excited. So it'll be unconventionalintellectual.com. So that's my website. You can find the printouts of the unmasking process on there. Those are done too, which is exciting. So you can find all that information there. On all of the social medias, it's going to be at Heavy on the Doctor. So right now I'm on TikTok and I'm creating a Instagram page because of the TikTok ban. So I'm going to move some content over there. And then I'm also creating a YouTube channel. So by the time this goes live, all of those things will be there. If you go to the YouTube and you're like, who is this the right person? It's no videos. It's because I'm just creating all these things because I want to make sure I have all of these different platforms and mediums. But on my website, there is a contact me. So you can feel free to send me a message. It'll go directly to my email address, which is now Chelsi Potts at unconventionalintellectual.com. So feel free to send me an email. You just probably give me about 48 hours just to get to it. And sometimes if you send me something loaded, give me a couple days, because if I look at that, I don't want to just scroll past it and not really give you a really serious response. So sometimes I will take some time and chew on it, and then I'll reach back out to you and say, hey, I saw this, I'm chewing on it, and I'll follow up with you as soon as I can.
And I'll have all the links down below in the description so that they're easy links to go to, and then I also have them listed here. Before we end, is there anything else you want to say that I didn't ask you that you wanted to share? This is your time to speak freely.
I would say, what I will say I want to leave people with is more so talking about diagnosis and the validity of getting an official diagnosis versus self-diagnosis, because I think we can get caught on that a lot, and not move forward and get the help that we need. So I do want to touch on that. So if you suspect that you have autism, there are studies out there that will tell you that if you suspect it, and usually probably about 90% plus are actually accurate in that they do have it. If you need the validation of getting a diagnosis officially, then by all means, I don't discourage you from doing that. But if you can't afford it, you don't have access to it, you can't find anybody to do it, please work on making sure that you're working through the trauma that can come with being masking and all of those different things. There's a ton of resources. You can use my website for that. There's Unmasking Autism, which is a great book, but look into like different self-help strategies. And then you can even talk to a therapist that may not be qualified exactly in autism, but just talking to them about what you're doing and helping them, letting them help you find coping mechanisms to deal with that, because you don't have to deal with it alone. And so that's just really the message I want to put out there. And don't feel like if you're not validated by official diagnosis that you can't get the help that you need, or that you can't identify, as autistic. It's not a special club. It's not something that you have to, just I have to have this in order to be able to say it. But just make sure you get the help that you need, and give yourself grace and kindness, and just work through it. And just other than that, I just want to tell people to just be encouraged. Just be encouraged, and you'll be surprised that once you lean into who you are, how beautiful that journey can be. Like, we're all here for a reason. I believe we're all here in this collective human experience because we are all destined to do certain things, and we put together this great puzzle piece of life. And so your puzzle piece is important, right? Like, you have ever gotten into an end of a puzzle and you see that one piece in the puzzle and it's not there, it messes up the whole puzzle. So I look at everyone's life like that. So always remember, like, we need that puzzle piece. We need you. So don't hide behind your mask. Don't, come out into the world, and you'll be amazed at what you can accomplish and how many people that you can inspire, even if it's just you inspiring yourself. That's all that matters. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you so much. This was a great conversation, and I'm so happy that I found you on TikTok and that we were able to come together and spread awareness and educate people. And I'm excited that I was your first one too.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate this. This was fun.
Yes.
Thank you for making this a good experience.
In today's episode of Listen, Love, Connect, we learned about the late diagnosis in autism, why it's happening, and how people are reacting. Thank you guys for watching. But wait, make sure to visit and follow these Instagram accounts Check out my website, exceptionalheroes.com, to learn more about my patent pending therapeutic device and to buy some Exceptional Heroes merch. See you guys next time, and always remember to listen, love, connect. Bye.